So we're back. This is our part two. And so the first time around, we spent most of our time, we did a little highlight feature with the biocomputer interfacing with Protocol Labs and this guy, Marblestone. And then most of it was about sort of the vision statement that was done by Juan Benet of Protocol Labs. And then we sort of closed with a clip from the HyperCert cycle that was our lead in to this idea of tokenized public goods. And we talked a little bit about the fact that my conjecture is that they're going to come up. He said, Juan Benet, at the end of his talk, that they're looking at new finance models for this emerging technology, one that will advance it as quickly as possible and let many different teams participate and advance the technology as quickly as possible. And so my sense is that they're going to frame these emerging technologies, especially within the climate space and the human capital improvement / poverty amelioration space, as public goods. And so the second part that we're going to go into today, these clips are related. They're from different presentations, but they relate to digital public goods and the financing of these digital public goods. But before we got started, I spent some time over the past day looking a little bit more into this idea of like a monetary ecology and this idea of using tokenization of diverse assets, natural assets and human assets to, in the way they would like to do it, is to attempt to, under cybernetic governance, which we talked about previously, like this control grid system of balancing out how the world's networks operate in a way that leads to balance and homeostasis. And that's part of the regenerative stuff that's this refi of regenerative. And so the story that they like to tell is that they'll get everything tokenized, they'll manage everything as these tokens, and instead of an extractive economy, they'll come up with one that's like circular and abundant for everyone. I mean, that's the story that they like to tell. Only it involves that we're all swimming in EMF radiation and nanobiotechnology so that we can be controlled through the cybernetic system. And so I wanted to start just by touching on, again, this article from the Santa Fe Institute in 1994. Because Citigroup at that time, I think it was before it was Citicorp, they were one of the major funders, and they were setting up Santa Fe Institute to work on economic physics and sort of linking together high-level supercomputing and complex systems analysis with economic modeling. And so this paper from 1994 was talking about the idea of creating independent agents in these simulated environments. Now, this is in the late 1980s. So this is really publicly accessible cloud computing. I mean, this is on the early side. And they talked about the idea of developing individual participants as traders in the simulation and running the simulations and seeing how the psychology of the market developed, and then changing things out. In fact, they would actually pull some of the traders out and put them in timeout and then see how the simulation would keep running. And then the nature of the simulation, the context would change. And so then when they put the traders back in, it was a different environment. And the traders who had been the best traders actually did worse because the trading environment had evolved in the time in which they were in timeout. Now, this is all within the simulation, but I think it's really important to conceptualize that within this new space of digital currency and ecology where we have multiple different kinds of tokens trading information, and that they're developing these, the guy from Bancor, high level physics, like high energy physics research tied to velocity of token transfers in community currencies, that there's this blending of economic physics and biophysics that is about to happen, and the way in which they can pull traders out of the game, that they will be able to enact that sort of play on people's wallets, or like wallets in terms of certain supply chains, certain individuals, certain things to manage the homeostasis. So that's sort of the intro. And I don't know if either of you guys want to hop on or say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess specifically with the community inclusion currency stuff, a lot of it is, follows kind of like the traditional aid patterns of charity designed to get groups and people connected or consumed by like the dominant system of power. So in community currency, with community inclusion currencies that are on blockchain and the ones that we are all are, it's about like, you know, coercing or instead like just giving people free money, but to get the free money, you know, you have to share a phone or get on the app and the survey and identity and all this sort of stuff, and that they're all funded. It's pretty much another extension of the whole impact finance paradigm. So they'll be funded by donations from donors in like regular currencies, and then those are used as reserves in really a fractional reserve banking system to mint to like an excess of the community currency. So they'll leverage the donor's money by like 4 times or something, and then have that circulate in that specific community with a bunch of different rules about how it can be spent and how it can be redeemed for the actual like national currency. And so it's both, there's a lot of different rules and parameters and stuff in order to like manage that whole system. It's a whole cybernetic digital economic kind of microcosm, and it has, well, also getting people sort of rolling on the whole digital money, digital identity front for further expansion, and ideally getting them involved in the like larger economy that's already been gone through this process. So I'm not really sure why I was saying that.
And not even just people, eventually animals too, right? I mean, the whole lead yards, right? they want the animals.
Yeah, but they kind of want to talk about it like that that the animal is gonna be involved, but you know, it's just like they just come up with essentially an algorithm that they say represents an animal, so you can donate to the algorithm.
Well, they had the Dogecoin, so after the dog or whatever.
But you think about the rights of nature, like how that's been set up to create a digital representation of a river or a mountain or a forest, like, right. And it will have digital rights in the simulation for the game, the purposes of the game.
Well, most people that I know that were like, you know, celebrating these rights of nature proposals and they've even had some things pass in different places, and they don't think of it in economic terms. They're not thinking of it as, oh, they're going to create a market around this, and you know, they're just thinking, you know, in their mind, they're just like, oh, we don't want to put toxins in the river. You know, you don't need to, you don't need a market to do that. You just don't put toxins in the river. But like most people, I mean, it's kind of amazing to read this stuff because it's so absent from public consciousness or even public debate. I mean, it's completely absent. Like most people have no idea, you know, and it's kind of amazing that something so significant can be going on without any awareness of it at all.
They can't all be in on it, Jason.
They don't know they're in on it. They're in on it. They don't know it. We're all in on things we have no idea what we're in on.
Exactly. They're counting on us not to know the other parts of the story. One of my other big maps that I've been working on is around descent, and with this guy, John Clippinger. You can go past that one
down here?
into the next. No, just keep going.
Down
red
here?
line. Just click on where the red lines are. Click on the red, like.
Okay, the red line.
And Alison, if you don't mind, if I could just really quickly add with the Santa Fe Institute too, is that they have like direct connections, like people that have done postdoc fellowships and stuff, working for Block Science, which is like the preeminent blockchain simulation like engineering firm that is designing these community currencies with grassroots economics, and is also works with IXO a lot with the IDCC and stuff in Hong Kong.
Oh, I didn't realize
that. So there's like a direct connection with the Santa Fe Institute with those people. And her name is, I can never pronounce it, Shruti Appaya, and she's the head of product and smart contracts for the IOHK, the Cardano company right now. But she worked in one of the pieces. Yeah.
She was in one of the series that you wrote for Silicon Icarus. Is that right? Yeah, I do remember her. So Jason, it's just on the left column, not the dot. Leave the dots alone.
Oh, not the dots.
And just scroll down.
Oh,
and go to the one under the picture with the red line.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
Leave the dots alone.
Yeah. How's that? Sorry.
Okay. I created a complicated system. It's too complicated.
I can actually make this bigger if you give me 2 seconds. Soon Block Science will be modeling the complexity of Alison's maps. They take that for giving us all this shit.
Give me 1 second. I can actually make this bigger. Boom.
That's okay. Boom. I think I can read it. Like I can resolve even with my eye.
Boom. Oh, wait, wrong one. Boom.
Boom. I don't know what's happening. There we go.
Oh, look at that. Bam. All right. Look at that.
Okay. So what I wanted to sort of point out that I think is increasingly interesting, like as we're doing this work together, Leo, like with the biophysics and then the economic physics and the social physics, is it's all layers. I mean, they're trying to use the same sort of physical methods across the board and sort of bringing them all together. And so this is an interview with John Clippinger, who has long been at MIT Media Lab, and he was working on that From Bitcoin to Burning Man book and was part of the Descent program and working with Leotaire on the monetary ecologies and something called ID Cubed, which was a relatively early digital identity program in 2012 with Sandy Pentland. So they had a lot of, it's interesting because it's almost all scrubbed. You can only get it on the way back, but the ID Cubed was early digital identity out of MIT Boston, but in partnership with World Economic Forum as well. And so this is a relatively recent podcast within the last couple of years with the head of Regen. And then maybe after this, after I get done with this, Jason, we can show that dashboard. But it's exchanging credits for regenerative finance. And I think primarily in the space of ecosystem services. And this guy who he's working with in Regen is based in Great Barrington. So this is part of that Schumacher Small is Beautiful local currency initiative. But in this section, John Clippinger, and he's talking about signaling and the tokens and the signaling. And so I'm just going to actually sort of read this, if this is all right. And I want you to sort of imagine that the variety of tokens that start to be exchanged, whether they're in refugee camps, whether they're in opportunity zones in urban cities or favelas in Brazil, whether they're somehow coming off of representations of giraffes wearing heart monitors attached to drones. Like there are all of these things that on the one hand are economic signals, but I think are also ultimately related to almost like a biochemical signal, like a hormone or an enzyme or something in a global superorganism. Like they're imagining this Gaia hypothesis as like this pulsating networked organism that they're trying to keep in balance through their cybernetic currency token management system. Okay, so this is John Clippinger in this podcast. It says it's not an omnipotence of one price signal. What happens is that there's a loss of information that goes, and this is where I believe in multi-token models and in homeostatic models. A market is very constant of pricing signals. It is sort of a mechanistic system. It doesn't self-regulate. It clears and collapses basically. In a homeostatic system with feedback, you have multiple signals that adjust themselves because it's a multi-dimensional problem. Okay, so what they're saying is the old model doesn't work, which I think we're probably all in agreement that the old model does not serve natural life on Earth very well. But what they're proposing as a counter proposal is a tokenized homeostatic system. And then it goes on to talk about entanglement versus enlightenment. I would argue, and this is where as an entanglement model versus an enlightenment model, and this is where multiple token captures different aspects, the body doesn't work. there's not a price signal on the body. It does not have options in the body. These are load balancing systems that mitigate themselves in order to allow other points of complexity and regulation, in order to joint outcomes rather than winner takes all outcomes. This gets into evolutionary models of multi-level selection versus individual selection. And this is where you get all this religious wars about Dawkins and this sort of libertarian saying, well, it has to be self-initiating. It can't be multi-level selection. But we know from game theory and repeated games that cooperative outcomes are higher. And in order to have cooperative outcomes, you have multiple dimensions. And that is why the multi-token model and the stuff we're doing at MIT and this sort of semi-homeostasis is, well, you don't optimize for one dimension. Everything gets optimized in prices. You're just collapsing information. And so I know that might be a bit all over the place. This is a transcript off a podcast, but essentially what they're saying, they're modeling complex systems dynamics. And what they're saying is the old model of a quote unquote free market, which both of them agree isn't actually a free market, had a certain outcome which led to repeated collapse. And that this new model of managed complexity or guided complexity in and of itself relies on the coordination of multiple levels of signaling beyond a single price signal. And so they're building into the complexity into the economic model as if it were like a body, as if it were like a complex system working together rather than just a single market, if that makes sense. And so I think understanding the tokens in that way allows you to understand something that on the surface doesn't seem to make much sense. Like, why would you have all these different tokens? Well, you have them because they're actually implementing an entire new approach to governance, which is much more complex, and which they think, weirdly, adding all this complexity is somehow going to enable them to manage it more effectively. Like, to me, that seems counterintuitive, that you would have that many more variables and somehow it would be easier, but maybe they're thinking quantum computing is going to solve all these problems. So
yeah, and they won't be managing a lot of it. It's going to be run off smart contracts, ideally.
They won't be managing it, but it is also like a degree of kind of central planning too, because they're, if they're guiding it, what are the criteria for the guidance? You know what I mean?
Science.
Right. So, and who's deciding on that? It's like, these agents, that they're talking about are not, they're not free agents. I mean, obviously they're giving some sort of leeway, but there's guidance there, and that's what I find interesting. Did they talk about that in this interview?
No, I mean, I think there's some understanding that we're all part of some body that is this Gaia hypothesis, right? That is this emergent superorganism. So, what constitutes an optimal outcome? And then the reality is that to acquire a holistic optimal outcome is going to be pluses and minuses for different people depending on where you are. Like, it's not always going to be that you're going to come out with something that makes you feel happy, in managing the larger organism. So yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. In one way, it is like a giant collective, and yet it's absolutely not communist or socialist. That's the thing that's really hard, is that the conservatives are saying, oh my gosh, you're coming at me with communism. Let's have a whole nother Cold War and we'll fight it like that. And I'm like, no, it's not actually a political ideology. It's a cybernetic mechanical system. It's a systems theory ideology, but we're not taught to even think of anything in that way. And so people don't even have that vocabulary to understand it. They're like, okay, here are the choices that I know, and so I'm going to pick one. It looks kind of like this. And I'm like, no, so we actually have to understand it in these other ways, or the story that we're going to choose to occupy is going to be a dead end.
And I guess, I feel like you could argue that this is totally a political ideology. It's just way beyond what we've been taught are political ideologies. But I'd say where this sort of is manifesting this sort of multi-token homeostatic future, I feel like I've seen most clearly in the intersection between the Red Cross catastrophe bonds and the community currency, community inclusion currencies and the ecosystem services tokens, where basically in the catastrophe bond, they have these modelers. In this case, for the Red Cross, there's this company called Matiga Solutions, where they're modeling all the possible like damages to the ecosystems and the local economies and the people and all of that disruption, and then injecting those community inclusion currencies as sort of emergency economic relief for those people, all based on those sorts of simulations. So they would be having the tokens for like the whole ecosystem, the whole impact on ecosystem services from like a volcano or whatever, and also on the like actual local economies where people just buying and selling and stuff, and then on the people themselves, because identity is just a token. It's basically just a non-fungible token is the way you can think about digital identity. So they sort of add all of those together in order to like make their decisions and do the actual like insurance risk assessment for like what's happening on the world. That sort of the insurance sort of provides the impetus for that larger overview of the like risk assessment of the whole thing, from the like financial value of the ecosystems and of those economies and whatever. So yeah.
And most people, they can't even, it's beyond what our ability to process. Like it's too many variables, right? We're not meant to be able to process this. So they just,
Well, that's the thing with like, my libertarian friends is like, they're just looking at everything as a market. And I'm like, what you think of as a market is doesn't really exist. There's so many other things going on between the creation and extinguishing of money, between insurance, between, betting on, shorting. I mean, there's all these different things that are going on that are just totally outside of people's like simplistic understanding of what a market is, and yet that's their framing, but it's not an accurate picture of the world.
Well, I think a lot of people imagine that it's like about your small town and you have you own an independent restaurant or a bookstore, something like, and I think that there's sort of an old fashioned idea of like having a local community that's detached from these larger multinational entities. But you're right. I mean, it's for the most part, it's not that. It's not that at all. And even if it is that, then there are all these other layers attached.
Right. Those things do exist, but they're actually, they're anomalies. They're not the norm. They're well, here, I'll bring up this,
oh, yeah.
So you want to explain what this is, Leo?
Yeah, so this is the Regen project, which is on the Cosmos blockchain. And they're one of these organizations making like ecological credits. And I believe for all of these are all pretty much carbon credits. There's something I haven't looked, and I just found out about this like 10 minutes ago. So, if you click on like the first one, the Harvey Manning. So basically these are all like specific forest projects or in cityscapes where they've created tokenized carbon credits that you can sell and like retire on the regen market in order to, like they say, to fund the maintenance or preservation of the forest and stuff. And they're working on like a lot more complex things, like not just carbon credits, but like water quality or storm off damages, the whole like gambit of ecosystem services and pollinators and that sort of thing. But they've just like, they're actually like, you can do that, they're doing this, you can just go buy it. Right.
And when we talk about public goods, this would be like a tokenized public good.
This would be a tokenized public good, like all green finance scheme. That's
scheme is the correct word. When it's like, go ahead.
Like, I guess we'll show it later, but like the NF trees, like, because essentially it looks really nice in the photo, but on the back end, like on the dashboards, it's all about data. And for these tokens to function, there's sort of real-time accountability and transparency that requires remote sensing, like remote geospatial sensing of the conditions on the ground. Like we want to make sure that forest didn't burn up or that nobody chopped it down or what have you. And so essentially, whether it's natural resources or human capital resources, those things then become put under pervasive surveillance to secure the asset. Because once it's tokenized, it doesn't just exist. It has to exist across like 4 dimensions of time. And to guarantee that for the market, there has to be something continually beeping, saying, yes, it's still there. Yes, it's still there. It's in this condition. And so that's where the whole, like, what I've talked about, like weaponization of space is so important.
And I feel like this is a good time to show the NF tree clip, because it has the actual,
So I think that's the bottom, light gray one.
That visual part explains well what you just said.
And this is from Protocol Labs, which is what we were talking about. Oh, it was a different tree.
That's
not it. Oh, sorry. That was sorry. I just saw the word.
Another aberration.
That was the Burning Man tree. Sorry. Let me grab this. So you may not.
Oh wait, what's this? Oh yeah,
that's just a still image.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I have a link. Like if you click.
Yeah, let me grab it here. Hold on 1 second. Give me 2 seconds. You guys just chat. Give me 2 seconds and I'll grab this thing because I want to do it. Because otherwise I won't get the audio. I don't have the audio patch.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it'll just take me 2 seconds here. You guys carry on.
Yeah. So just like what Alison was saying, that all these projects, they usually incorporate like satellite imagery is probably the main like mechanism for getting the data, like ensuring that the trees are still there and they haven't been cut down or whatnot, but also drones and just like IoT devices strapped to the trees and whatnot for.
It's hard to think of the implications of all this. I mean, but clearly, people are going to be gaming the system, and people. If there's a financial incentives, people do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's like it's kind of I don't even think it's possible to really even foresee how this will change society and the world that we live in on levels the things that we probably haven't even thought of.
Totally.
All right, just about there. 1 second.
And I will say too, like they're remote sensing stations, and like what we've been normalized to, like the wildlife cameras, like remote sensing cameras of wildlife, because I'm sure there's biodiversity markets that are huge too, in addition to carbon. So like we've been trained, like, oh, look at this cool clip. Like, did you know there's a cougar in Florida? Like we've seen it or something. And we're all like, yeah, that's way cool. Look at that camera footage. But what we don't realize is that these cameras have been strapped to things, all over the natural lands, and it's going to be used again for the financial markets, but I think also for surveillance, so if at some point people take refuge in public lands, then there'll be a lot of cameras out there to keep an eye on you too, like not just the cougars.
Yeah. And that's like with the Arise BioCloud, like in the Netherlands, there's this project called the Arise BioCloud where they're making pretty much like a blockchain identity database for all multicellular organisms in the Netherlands, and a big part of it is like integrating all the wildlife cameras and sonar and stuff to like what you just said, capture all the biodiversity and keep track of it, which would most certainly be also used for the ecosystem services stuff, as well as the biological data bank thing.
Well, we'll finally know if a bear shits in the woods.
We'll always be watching.
The bear's like, hey, wait a minute, can I get some privacy here?
About that are given to brokers and to third-party verification systems. Well, we store our donations in an escrow account. So if I'm a donor and I want to donate to the Gain for His platform, the money is actually not sent directly to the communities. It's held in this intermediary escrow account and is only given out every month or every couple of months, it depends on the project, through proof of care. And proof of care is what I will be showing you later in a demo. These donations are captured in an impact certificate. So once we know once we have verified that impact has actually happened, then the donor gets an impact certificate where you actually show the value beyond carbon. So you get to see biodiversity, water metrics as metadata. And the amazing thing about this impact certificate, which I will show you later, is that they're also dynamic. So these are the NFTs. I donate into the platform. We created this for our project in Paraguay. Right now, everything looks great. It's green. If we find out that something has happened to the project, the image changes. This is a dry image. If there's wildfire, hopefully we never get to use this. Then you see that the project is burning down.
Good God.
So, and all of our methods is decentralized. We're moving towards decentralized science. Everything is open source data. So if anyone wants to fact check us, everything is open source. You get to see our platform. We're really up for transparency, and let's research together. We empower local communities with technology to measure one of their valuable assets, nature. These are our projects, our first pilot projects, the Defensores del Chaco area and the Cayapo area. These are NCTs. Actually, we've taken the liberty of looking at token protocols, NCTs. All of this is stored on the blockchain, so we get to see the associated Vera carbon credit ID. These are the Vera carbon credits that you actually get from token right now when you're buying tokenized carbon. These are the actual projects. You can see there's actually been deforestation through time. This is how it looks in 2003. No deforestation at all. Slow growth of deforestation, and some even intruding inside the project borders. So it's a tree cover loss per year. Enough about that. Let's figure out how we actually can donate and have real impact. So say I want to donate to the Defensores del Chaco project, which is in Paraguay. I will go into here and I can choose to fund this project, and as a receipt I get an NF tree. This is the NF trees you get. We have different tiers, white, silver, or gold. We are currently on Solana and we are Web3 first. So let's monitor that project site. We'll let this load for a bit and I'll just scroll down. Yeah, so this is the project site that that I told you about. Deforestation happening right next to it. Estimated baselines, estimated forest covers, as long as the estimated forest cover is above 75%, then we will release the funds up to them. And as a reward, you get to see your the recent wildlife cameras. This is one that's really one of my favorites. It's of a capybara. And all of this encompasses, it becomes proof of care. As you can see, this is again the recent drone images and project funding history to make it as transparent as possible. You get transaction ID, the amount that is stored, and the date. So depending on how much you choose to donate, you can, if you only donate a small amount, we want to make this accessible for everybody. If you want to donate just a small amount, we give you a satellite image as a donation receipt. You also get to see, data subscription to the Sentinel-2. Yeah, this is just if you want to donate $5 or something. But as you donate more and more, for our biggest donors, we airdrop them. You get the capybara so that would be for our higher donors, and again the NFTs that I showed you above, as well as updated metadata. These are dynamic NFTs, so if the forest cover changes, you can just look at your wallet and verifiable impact just by looking at your wallet, total plant species and estimated carbon inside. And hopefully this will never change. It will always be green.
most people don't even know this is happening. And I would say even people right now in the space who are talking about like the issues with the corporate climate agenda, not many people are talking about this stuff. I mean, it's sort of like corporate washing broadly, but like, how is it going to happen? What does this next phase look like? It looks like spinny replicas of forests. And then the other thing is, to me, those pictures of a village, like the housing with the rainforest, is what it means is that essentially under the guise of global finance, green global finance, they can surveil the entire earth like with impunity, right? And so if you're an indigenous community in the middle of the Amazon, well, tough luck, because someone's got to monitor your forest, and you take second, billing to whatever digital, geospatial surveillance, remote sensing that's going to happen. And so it's a different kind of mining.
It's completely insane. And it's like, it just like the fact that people are doing with this a straight face. Another thing I noticed, like that, look how young that girl is. Like and a lot of the people in the space that are like giving these presentations are young people, but they're not the real driving force behind it. And so I think that's important to point out. They have these bounties and stuff, and they get young people to work on these things, but it's being driven by global capital, and obviously the cybernetic aims, which I still, sorry.
No, it's good.
Go ahead, Leo. How do you feel? How do you feel about the situation, Leo?
Great, I'm really excited.
Have you got the capybara yet?
What have you? Oh no, I didn't get that much. I mean, I don't know if I really have that much different to add. It's it's really crazy, but it's totally happening. A lot of these projects on different blockchains, they're not super big, but you can actually go and buy it and like look at their transparent data and whatnot, and like it's happening. It's not 5 years out. And of course, people don't really realize how much that information and all that surveillance is. I mean, like you said, people broadly understand the corporate greenwashing, trying to financialize nature and that sort of stuff. But like specifically with the insurance markets and creating more integrated, like global risk assessment frameworks is something that I don't think so many people are really considering with that. And that, ever since satellites have been up, there's been pretty much total surveillance without impunity. So it's not anything new, but the satellites are pretty insane on what they can do and how like granular, like what they can figure out from all these different types of satellites, like whether they're radar or microwave or, visible light or not. They can, they're beaming electromagnetic waves to the earth and then reading the reflection back out. So in a variety of like wavelengths of light. And when they put that all together, they can really tell like a whole bunch of different things. Like even, with the carbon credit stuff, they can tell like how much the trees are sequestering like through their like natural cycles based on whether they're like fruiting or flowering or in the winter or whatnot, like just from the like magnetic spectra that the satellites can receive from the trees, and they can tell that like pretty well at this point, which is
a lot of people don't realize that the U.S. has the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I mean, how many people have heard of this? Not too many, but that's. And actually, I'm literally a few blocks away from Maxar, MAXAR, which is a huge multinational company working in geospatial mapping, and yeah, it's they make these maps that are layered based on infrared and topography and all these different things that they can do, and then they can overlay them, and they can get a pretty, like you said, pretty granular look at what's going on. It's pretty wild.
Well, and then I would say too, part of what she was showing is progression over time, right? So she was showing the series of pictures. Now, if you add that with prediction modeling of future simulations, right? Like you start to aggregate vast data over geographic distributions over time, and then do the forward modeling. And Jason, I think you said previously about like, you can model the future and then you can influence that you get the future, your preferred future, right? Like, so it's, we're working in these other dimensionalities that I think using the big data analytics that at least, I mean, they might have been possible for a very handful of people like in the past decades, but now that's moving into being just incorporated as a standard method of business, like modeling, I think. And once you have the digital money, like I think a lot of people understand, like in geofencing, that there's a level of control of that, but it's not just to starve you, it is to balance out these systems. And then how will that past modeling and future prediction modeling linked into energetic transactions, whether that's like for food or shelter or different things, like in real time, like they could take a picture of it and then act on that like in a pretty quick turnaround. I mean, even they were talking about these escrow accounts, like we'll hold the money until we have proof of care. But that whole model could be used in any number of ways. And again, who is accountable? Later on, like if we have a chance to look at that, one more thing from Clippinger, what they're talking about is a global world contract, the smart contract layer as a world federation. So if something happens and you want to launch an appeal to some automated decision that's happened, like where would you even go? Like, I mean, it becomes.
Well, don't worry, they're working on that. There's all sorts of like smart contract
arbitration
protocols and stuff that's going on. So that
machine's got it covered.
Yeah, and like Materium and
oh great, let the occultists do it.
They goofed up.
So how about this digital public goods? Our good friend Tamika.
Yeah, so there's two actually here. One is starts with Anne-Marie Slaughter, and then Tamika Tilleman. So before
Tamika.
When we were saying,
Tamika.
you
I always say Tamika. You say Tamika. I say Tamika.
I'm not 100% sure which it is, but that you have certain people to front the system, and they're people like, I mean, I don't know how they all get chosen, but it's to make it seem maybe like, I don't know, like less dominating perhaps like than it actually is. But I think the fact that these two clips are from New America, which is the centrist think tank largely funded with money from Eric Schmidt, they were the ones who advanced the Bretton Woods II, which is sort of the new makeover of the decentralized World Bank and IMF, I guess. That's what Shanzai City IO2 is going for. And it shows you the scope of this being a global project, right? Even if they have, the young woman in her, mid to late 20s selling the NFTs to you, it's actually the iron fist behind it are these folks. So,
is it Anne-Marie Slaughter? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just grab it because there's a better way to do the video, which I didn't have this one loaded up. 1 second. Uno momento. See, I got all kinds of Spanish going on here.
And I mean, I knew New America from when I was first looking into the ed tech stuff and digital identity, way back when it was like the toddlers on blockchain and finding New America. But Tamika Tilleman was the one who developed a lot of the social impact finance policy and digital identity, and then went on to Andreessen Horowitz, and then is now in their spinoff that is linked to blockchain. And he was that keynote at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference. So he was the one that I was like, no, Jason, we actually probably do need to go and listen to see what this guy's saying at the blockchain conference. in
Yeah, and
Provo.
he was a part of the World Bank's. They had a like a lecture series on blockchain and education and impact finance, and he spoke in that as well too.
And it's interesting, John Clippinger that I talked about in earlier on, who's at MIT. He actually has a consulting firm, and the address appears to be a farm that's literally like 10 miles outside of, is it Mount Washington in New Hampshire, where the Bretton Woods Hotel is,
Oh, yeah.
which I find really ironic. It's like, oh, John's got a like, and it's a lot of it's public land, so his like the land that he has his consulting address at is probably like about as close as you could actually get to that hotel, public, like that you could own property close to, and these things are.
Wow. Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Your Excellencies, Prime Minister Solberg, ministers, leaders from civil society, government, philanthropy, and industry. I'm Anne-Marie Slaughter, the President of New America,
The sound
and I'm delighted to welcome you to this land.
What's that, Allison?
The sound isn't for us anyway.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
1 second. Sorry, I forgot one minor little detail here. I'll edit this, so
Okay.
we'll just go back to the beginning.
Welcome, everyone. Your Excellencies, Prime Minister Solberg, ministers, leaders from civil society, government, philanthropy, and industry. I'm Anne-Marie Slaughter, the President of New America, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this landmark conversation. 75 years ago, leaders from around the world came together to rebuild from the rubble of war. Communities that had been broken by crisis and conflict recognized that going forward, things had to be different. They harnessed the best tools of their time to build an international architecture, including the United Nations and the Bretton Woods systems. Those systems are still with us, and they have prevented another global war. We are once again living through a global moment when institutions are buckling under the weight of multiple crises. Families and communities worldwide are suffering loss and economic devastation from the current pandemic. And once more, there is a growing resolve that things must be different. We must do better. As Abraham Lincoln said in the context of another crisis, because our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. Today, technology gives us access to a new set of remarkable tools. In the same way that the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions expanded access to clean water, electricity, roads, peace, and security to unlock massive human potential in the 20th century, we can broaden access to a new generation of digital solutions to make an infrastructure for digital identity, digital payments, data management, e-procurement, and other systems. Those are emerging as key drivers of progress around the world. If we do our jobs, open source technology platforms are poised to bring greater resilience, efficiency, and accountability to governments around the world. Many of you are founding members of the Digital Public Goods Alliance and are already deeply engaged in this work. Melinda Gates and Jack Ma led a high-level panel on behalf of the UN Secretary General on digital cooperation. We have with us leaders today who are building open source solutions for identity, payments, and many other challenges. Our opportunity is to unite these projects into one common ecosystem defined by common standards. Doing so will not only lead to greater progress within nations, but between nations. As our first two speakers today would suggest, digital solutions do not divide on north-south lines. This is a global effort, and many nations in the global south are leapfrogging legacy systems. These innovations then thus present a huge opportunity for all nations to develop 21st century solutions. Our organization, New America, is a think and action tank founded 2 decades ago to help societies harvest the opportunities and meet the challenges of the digital age. Within this realm, few issues are more important and more urgent than using technology to fix our broken public institutions. Our Digital Impact and Governance Initiative, affectionately known as DIGI, is already collaborating with the Rockefeller Foundation and governments in the United States and around the world to build and deploy open source platforms for the public sector. But we don't think, and we're not so naive as to think, that we can do this work alone. Building the next generation of digital government platforms and the communities required to support them will take a network just as big and as bold as the original countries who came together to create the United Nations. That's why we've brought a whole set of leaders today to think about how we can build an ecosystem.
All right.
All right.
Digi, that sounds like a rapper's name.
Yeah. So essentially, what I wanted to touch on in that clip. So Anne-Marie Slaughter is very connected. In fact, like when I first found out about blockchain, it was from this 4-hour presentation that New America was doing with the World Bank on blockchain. And it was like right in the middle was where Sean Conway was talking about the Trust Lab and Amply and the children, the pre-K children on blockchain in South Africa. So that was the door for me for blockchain, was through Anne-Marie Slaughter's event. And what they're talking about here within the smart contract layer, I feel like, is this new world order, right? Is the global governance layer that Huxley was after, that's part of the global super organism. Jason, I think we were talking a little bit a few days ago about the founding of the Aspen Institute. And at that time, there were folks at the University of Chicago pursuing the development of a world federation, of a world constitution in the post-World War II era. So these things are all sort of happening at the same time. And this is why they need to break down borders of governance. Like why I think in many respects, the government institutions and the electoral processes are being collapsed now, right? I mean, and throughout the media, throughout experiences, that there is an intentional collapse of our commonly understood electoral process to make way for the cybernetic smart contract layer to gradually usurp, maybe not all at once, but slowly to erode this idea. And I'm not a nationalist either, but I do think that, like, if there are these changes that are going to happen, or that they intend for them to happen, that there be robust conversation about it and that everyone be informed about what's actually behind it. Not that we just do this slow slide into the new normal that is cybernetic governance. And in the podcast that John Clippinger had with the CEO of Regen, they were talking about this shift in governance. And this was a couple years ago, so it was pre this last voting round. But they were talking about essentially using like the 9th and 10th Amendment spaces as areas of experimentation in this new decentralized distributed governance protocol. And in this, Clippinger is saying, let's see, that's not going to be taken up at the federal level by a federal government, but you can have different states recognize it. The 10th Amendment is being quoted as the laboratories of democracy. That's what Louis Brandeis called them, so that they can come together and run experiments and make mistakes and revise in the sandbox, whatever you want to call them, to have accelerated innovation in order to address these fundamental changes that we have to do in a very short period of time. Different states may have different textures, different flavors, but I don't believe that it's not achievable in its current form. And so they're talking about this, how to create a test bed for these changes that are underway. And then Clippinger goes on to say, well, actually, like Gavin Newsom, that we're really looking at California, they seem to be pretty excited there. And then surprisingly, there's also a lot of interest in Texas, which is something we've continued to talk about, the two largest economies in the country that theoretically are on polar opposite sides of the political ideological spectrum are being pulled into the blockchain governance system, one appealing to freedom and liberty and the other appealing to sort of cooperative social justice, that these are intentionally coming in. And I think this New America space is advancing this, among others. But there's this understanding that we're in this transition period in which there is a takedown of how we normally understand elected office and democracy, only they're going to be slowly reframing and bringing on this futarchy or fluid democracy or augmented democracy, quadratic voting. These things are coming in as an entree to the automated governance. So, and then I'll just say the last one, if we could just scroll down, and this will be the last thing I'll have to say about this. I think it's
scroll up.
Just scroll up, to this next one. So the why, right? And I keep saying that this is part of this guided evolution. They're using economics and emerging tech as part of the guided evolutionary process. Actually, can you scroll up a little bit more? I must have. Okay. Yeah. So this is Clippinger talking about the evolutionary process, the tokenomics in evolution. It is a natural selection of dematerialization in some form. So getting rid of the material. What is happening with the whole virtual world and augmented reality is that things that are possible there are just astonishing. We are creating these mirror worlds and digital twins and all these other things. What we're doing in neuroscience, you can't put technology in a box. We're not understanding what technology is. And then Gregory of Regen answers, is it possible that part of the evolutionary arc here is to create a digital arena for our strange zero-sum monkey games to be able to play them out? So he's sort of saying, like, is the simulation where we play at being human? And then Clippinger laughs. I absolutely think that's true. I think that we are genetically confined within our genome, within certain kinds of strategies that are pretty fixed and pretty destructive. And the guy says, yeah, they're problematic. And Clippinger goes on to say, they're fucked up. They don't scale. Now we have to create a design space that liberates from this. I definitely believe that. I remember the first reading, what the hell is that? That's all crazy spiritual shit. I think he's talking about Charles Eisenstein here. It's basically software. He's talking about software. That's what he's talking about. And then software became digital and became the internet, and now it's become virtual and augmented reality. But when you start creating augmented things that actually function in an intelligent digital form, they can map in and out of physical form and can control a physical form. Well, what the fuck have you got? I can create an autonomous digital thing that can instantiate itself physically or not. I can transform that into the speed of light. Why isn't that where evolution tends to go? I'm not saying that we will upload ourselves, our brains. I don't like that if it works that way. But I think that you can create pretty smart learning and rapidly evolving digital agents that can or cannot instantiate themselves in some kind of physical form. Why physically travel when you can just send them and then instantiate them to come back? That's the later episodes of the original Star Trek. Laugh track. The guys run around in white robes. That's why I think that the whole framing you have now is like human species are the end game. Here, the AI being discussed in a way, it's like somehow we have to protect our point in time, but it just doesn't make sense. And then Gregory from Regen says, there's this sense I have from what you're just saying that maybe we should be emotionally ready for some sort of metamorphosis beyond what we know as human. And so I think as we understand all of these, I know that's sort of long, but like for me, holding the space that this imagining of digital public goods, of digital simulations, of prediction modeling, of agents is moving us towards the line that humans as material components can only cause harm in the world, like that we are foundationally harmful to the process and must be removed. So if we are going to continue with our damaging ways, it has to happen in the simulation. And then maybe we instantiate telepresence robots that come out and act as our better selves or something out of the simulation. Like maybe we go into the simulation and it models us as better humans. And then when it comes back out, it's sticking it into a robot, into the Sophia the robots or something like that. And this is how very important connected people, like thought leaders in the space. John Clippinger is someone who has been working with Sandy Pentland on this for decades upon decades. I mean, and no one knows that this is even part of the conversation. Nobody knows that the climate conversation is that, right, is digital agents instantiating themselves and then using this tokenomics to create and I think build out an armature for modeling the world. Like, we're not there yet, but I don't know what the time frame will be to create that model. So anyway, that's all I have to say about those things.
So the second,
you don't have to. I don't know. Do you want to listen to Tamika, or do you want to move on to Vitalik? We could skip. It's just a little bit more of the same, but.
Is it? Well, I have it queued up. I mean,
okay, we can listen to it if it's. I can't remember how exciting it was. I just think it's important that people know who these individuals are, because you know, the Klaus Schwabs and the Bill Gates of the world like sort of grab a lot of attention. And I'm not saying it's just him. Like he's representative of the part of the structure that he's in, but we'd probably be better served if more people understood the role of like Andreessen Horowitz, you know, in the space, I think in the Web3 construction space, and you know, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen in that as well.
To preface our plenary session, I want to introduce Tamika Tilleman, who leads New America's work on digital public goods. Tamika and his team build partnerships with governments, civil society, and technology providers to create modular open source technology platforms that transform the way governments deliver for society. They've also been expanding the knowledge base that is necessary to underlie the ecosystem. Tamika, over to you.
Path-breaking leadership, and to all of you who are helping to shape this watershed event. Several months ago, in anticipation of this gathering, our team began mapping the ecosystem of digital government platforms. Building on the work of outstanding consortia such as the Digital Public Goods Alliance and the Prosperity Collaborative that operate across numerous verticals, we surveyed the world looking for public sector solutions. In too many places, we found institutions designed in the 19th century using technology from the 20th century to try and meet the challenges of today. But thanks to the work of this community, we also found exceptions to that rule. We identified over 100 platforms in 40 jurisdictions where governments are transforming the way institutions deliver value. We also cataloged key lessons that can help move this work forward. All of that information is available in a report that was released this morning on our website and will be sent to you after this event. I'd like to focus on 3 of our findings, changes we believe will be vital to unlocking the full potential of digital public infrastructure worldwide. First, those of us participating today need to develop open standards to facilitate interoperability. The solutions we're creating will have vastly more power to lift up lives if they do not operate in isolation. Technologies that power our institutions should work together, and to state the obvious, that will require us to work together. Second, half the platforms in our analysis use open source code, but half do not. Along with a shift to open standards, we need public sector technology to be available on an open source basis. Doing so will not only accelerate the equitable spread of high-quality solutions, it will also build trust with the people we're trying to serve. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we've learned that building technology is often the simplest part of deploying solutions successfully. Ultimately, our efforts will rise or fall based on whether we create new models for multi-stakeholder governance, new strategies for financial sustainability, and effective multilateral architecture to support this work. The non-technical aspects of this broad agenda are in fact where we will need the highest levels of innovation. To sum up, open standards, open source, and open to the reality that technology is necessary but not sufficient to do this right. The stakes are high. Digital identity, data management, and contactless payments, as Anne-Marie indicated, will be key drivers of the recovery from this pandemic. Beyond that, harnessing the added accountability provided by digital government platforms could, in principle, free up $6 trillion a year, enough resources to fund all of the Sustainable Development Goals. To put that in context, if we succeed in fixing our institutions, we'll be on our way to fixing everything else, from ending poverty to addressing climate change. If we fail, no grant will be big enough to solve the problems that remain. So no pressure. It's just the fate of the world that is in our hands. Anne-Marie, back to you.
So do you think he really believes himself? God. Yeah, it's disturbing.
Well, I think that the emphasis on open source, huge, right? So this was the fall of 2020, September of 2020. They were already on the job of doing the surveys probably the summer of 2020. So this was ready to pop off. And their focus was electronic government, right? And again, in the freedom movement, like how many people do you imagine during that period of time were all moving to Florida and Texas where they're implementing electronic government, right? Like that's where like not being in the having the right analysis matters, because people like pick up and move. And I'm not saying like to second guess people's choices, but they don't understand the larger trajectory, that if they're not getting you through a health passport system, they're going to get you through your driver's license, through your voting, or through your educational transcript. And it's interesting what he was saying about saving the $6 trillion, because to me that feels like that's going to backstop some sort of tokenization to implement the open source, because open source is technically not private, so you need a new funding stream. But what you'll say is, look how broken our government is. Look how unaccountable it is. Look what a train wreck it all is on purpose. So therefore, by fixing it, we can throw this money instead into the emerging tech that will create the smart contract layer that will ultimately, like after we do our various sandboxes in various states under the 10th Amendment, then we can put it up in the cloud and just run it the whole world that way.
Yeah. Well, just the open standards, open source. Again, it's like we want access to everything. That's what I was just thinking about. Like everything's part of the system. Nothing can be outside of it. No one left behind, sort of thing. But yeah, it's a total information awareness too.
Well, and the standardized. I was going to say the IEEE and NIST, like this, that, and that's something that Roel has talked about, like in a number of his pieces, is the comprehensive nature of the interoperability standards. It has to be the same, like especially if Leo, what you were talking about, like arbitration measures or things like these are all about cross-border payments, because all of the investors and the investees, like they might not even live in a real place. Like it's all diffuse. Everything is diffuse. So it all has to be unified in order for any of it to work.
Totally. And I was just going to add for like digital identity, a big place where I don't think people quite appreciate is like business registration and like organizational registrations in general, where that's where I've seen for a lot of these projects that they're, just making a digital, because, businesses now already have various identification numbers for taxes and whatnot. So that's a big place where I've seen the move towards digital identity for businesses and stuff, which isn't like, oh, you're putting me on a computer type of thing. People don't think of it that way, so for psychology and stuff. But with businesses, and then it's really easy once you have the businesses and digital identity, then the employees is not far behind and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably for ESG somewhat too, like in some of those meeting those metrics. And I mean, and that's the thing I think, like with a cyber physical environment, actually everything has an identity. Like these sensor networks are like, their intention is that like this lamp over here on my table has an identity, and it like something will tell it how much time I used the lamp today. Like you're interacting with things that are non-human, that are even not what we would traditionally consider having a life, that will, because all of it is relationality. Like a socio-technical system is your relationship with other living things and other non-living things, and it's all mirrored in. So that level of granularity. And then when I can, there was that spin-off, and that, when I was looking at Alice, which was this data dashboard for poverty management, it was funded by Nominet Trust, and Nominet Trust that they were the ones assigning the IP addresses in the UK. But that's a very powerful entity. Like, and I can't even imagine what that even, like, you're going to need some sort of supercomputer assign all those numbers. Because like once this thing hits in terms of true Web3, like, I don't even know how you keep up with all of it. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, Leo, about the businesses, and everything's going to get a number.
Yeah. Okay.
And as far as standards go, there's a logic to it that makes sense. I mean, yeah, you want to have, you're building a house, you want to have, you know, a certain set of measurements that everybody's using. But when it comes to the, what's that?
The metric system.
I have a friend that writes a blog, and all he writes about is the metric system and the metric maven. He's a good dude, actually, but he's obsessed with the metric system. But yeah, I mean, there's a logic there. But when we're talking about the digital realm, it's more than just creating a standard. Okay, everybody uses. You know, one of my pet peeves is the cables. I'm like, can we just not have? Do we have to have 50 different cables? I'm constantly having to buy new cables because everybody has their own proprietary thing. So like there, I'd love to have a standard cable, that at least a connector or something that we could use. But with this, like with digital ID, it's not just the convenience of having your thing on the phone. It's surveillance, and it's submitting yourself to these markets and these systems of management and control. So, you know, there's beyond just the rational. Yeah, it makes sense. Everybody should be going by the same, you know, guidelines or whatever when they build something for interoperability or whatever. It's a whole nother level here that we're talking about that is not.
But when they're talking about the global south, like, oh, we're going to leapfrog those folks, right? Well, they're not leapfrogging those folks for their benefit per se. I mean, those are the resource. Those people and their natural assets of their, you know, are the resource that this Web3 thing is after. So of course they have to be part of it. Like, they can't not be part of it for this thing to work. So this framing of benevolence and allowing people to like advance into this brave new world, like there's a sort of a more sinister aspect to that leapfrogging that they're not upfront about.
Yeah, I was trying to find this screenshot that I did the other day of a video. It was a clip from a presentation where it was about Africa, and it was just basically saying that Africa is going to be the world leader in Web3. I can't find it, but yeah, that's the push.
Not surprised.
Yeah, there's a lot that I think it's Nigeria. There's a lot of crypto there. Like, a lot of people use it, and like probably I think one of the largest users of cryptocurrency in general, people of Nigeria. And then also the stuff like Seb's wrote about with the Central African Republic and country is, where they have a big program of tokenizing specifically mineral resources, but as a part of a whole broader digital government thing, and with the World Bank and
bring the size of
whatnot. But also, yeah, the IXO, they do a lot in Africa, of course, with Sean Conway in South Africa, and other stuff with like environmental analysis with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Regen has a market with the DRC too on that page, which we had up earlier. So yeah, Africa is definitely a big one, and that, like, you know, half of these pilots are all in Africa with the like smart contract based crop insurance. Those are almost all in Africa, and the community inclusion currency stuff mostly in Kenya, Nairobi. Like, you know, there's got to be so many NGO tech people running around in that city. It seems like everyone lives there, and that's where Jonathan Ledgard lives, I believe, is based out.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, it's odd.
All right, next clip.
Before we start this one,
yes.
I just say,
Sure.
So some of the stuff that I've been working on that goes along with the complexity theory is this idea, the game theory, right? And gamification and predictive analytics. So that her framing of the new money game, like the game element is important. And also, I will say, building off of that conversation about the metamorphosis with Clippinger, he was referencing in that exchange this guy, Martin Nowak, who is a professor of mathematics and biology at Harvard. And he had collaborated with E.O. Wilson, who was one of the sort of leading scientists around sociobiology and this idea of like social insects and collaboration. And in 2010, the two of them developed a theory of sociality, EU, and then sociality. This idea that you get better outcomes through cooperation, which on the one hand sounds great. Like, I'm not anti-cooperation, and I'm not all about like the winning or the domination stuff. But the fact that they'd like to engineer it through tokenomics, I find really challenging. And so when I was looking at, Clippinger was talking about gamification, game modeling, and that Nowak had much of his work was in gamification of biology, gamification of society and linguistics, and this socialization through tokenized cooperation. And what's interesting is that Nowak, the funding that they got for this 2010 paper around sociality, like the cooperation, the emphasis of economic cooperation with E.O. Wilson and Nowak, was funded by the NSF and the NIH, but also the Templeton Foundation, which I've talked about a lot, that they do physics and religion, the Gates Foundation, and also Jeffrey Epstein. So I think this idea of gamification towards an evolutionary imperative is important to keep in mind as we look at how they're framing this about a money game and the betting. There are many. I mean, Nowak is only one of, I'm sure, hundreds of sociobiologists who are using gamification around biological evolution. But yeah, it's a whole other level of game than we might necessarily appreciate from this presentation. And again, nice, young, peppy woman giving the delivery here.
And
So
what
the
I
money
got
game.
from reading, I was just reading that abstract of the paper by Nowak. A big part of their framing was how, like, people giving up their own, like having their own offspring and taking care of other people's offspring, like sacrificing for that as being like the higher mode of evolutionary organization, like social organization and stuff, which, very well mirrors if you're pushing ideas that people should be sacrificing for the collective, their own self-interest. Not that I want, obviously, everyone to be self-interested, and of course, like, we do sacrifice to live with each other, but it's different when they're clearly trying to get sacrifice to build like a computer cloud map.
We should let Sophia the robot run the world, so we'll just be the worker bees, like, behind the scenes. Yeah.
Well, and again, there's two things going on, which is the way that it's framed by Tamika Tilleman is benevolence. We're doing this out of benevolence and trying to improve humanity and end poverty and end war and make everything great. But there's another element here that actually is purely self-interested, and that never gets discussed. That there are. It's not even what they're saying it is. It's not about. I mean, come on, like you're going to stop climate change by putting a sensor and a camera on everything. I mean, it's totally insane. Like, if anybody stops and thinks about it, yet these stories kind of go unquestioned. They're like, oh well, yeah, we do need to save the planet, whatever. So it's like there's layers to this whole thing. Okay.
So the money game. What is the money game? So what I'm defining as the money game is the societal game that we're all playing, where money is points, and people are trying to achieve points because they want to have status, value, luxury, and everybody's trying to compete for the high score. You can never really actually win the money game, but there's really no cap to the score. You can keep competing in the money game. So even if you're one of the people who have the top points in the money game, you can still keep playing it. The things that get you the most points in the money game are things that really are acting in the individual best self-interest. It's like creating consumer goods and services that people want and are really in high demand. They are created to maintain the status quo. And one example I really like using for this is public education. So public education is provided by governments. And when kids go to school, they learn about economics, they learn about how society works today, they learn how they can enter the society and be a productive member of society, kind of continuing to turn this wheel. They're not really learning about how to add the most value for the collective and things that are actually going to lead to our long-term sustainability. Also, these cycles are lacking feedback. There's not a lot of opportunity to tell the government that you don't really like the public goods that they're providing. Don't worry, the governments will take care of the environment. Governments are taking care of our waste. They're also taking care of environmental causes, but governments' jurisdictions only extend as far as their borders. So they're only taking care of what's happening like within their own space. So anything that happens outside of that, like oceans, which are covering the entire earth, end up kind of being like a dumping point for a lot of plastic. Like this waste problem is something I care about really deeply. And so just kind of seeing like governments are trying their best to provide the best services that they can, but they're just limited. They're limited by jurisdiction, they're limited by power, they're limited by capital, and there's not much more that they can do. We can use Web3 to build new money games. So we can actually flip the script and imagine if you could get the most points in a new money game for providing the most value to the collective. You could get the most points for providing public goods. And you would still get points for adding private goods, but the most points would be to the people that are taking care of the collective the best. I think that this is a really, really exciting thing and an opportunity that we have in Web3. When governments fail to provide public goods that are in demand, people start nonprofits. Nonprofits pop up to take care of things like the environment, and they beg for donations so that they can actually provide these public goods. When governments aren't adequately providing them, nonprofits are there taking the brunt of the load. The problem is that nonprofits are in a losing game. Nonprofits are begging for donations. They're like, hey, can you share with me some of your points? And in order to support public goods and support nonprofits, people are like, okay, I will sacrifice some of my points because I care about this cause. But imagine if we could change the system so that you could support nonprofits and actually gain points in a new money game. Giveth, if you've heard of it before or not, is a donation platform. And first off, we're trying to bring nonprofits into the Web3 space so they can start getting into Web and unlocking this potential. We start out by making a zero-fee, peer-to-peer, no intermediary donation platform, but we want to make it so that people who are playing and interacting with the protocol can actually win the money game. With givebacks, 100% of every donation goes to the project, always. And up to 75% of the value of this donation is actually streamed back to the donor in Give tokens over time. Give is the governance token, the token of Giveth. It's something that we created and we're emitting to donors when they donate. So for the first time in the history of ever, you can actually support public goods projects and gain points in this micro money game that also affects the macro money game. You're actually gaining value from donating. This has never happened before. So the next product that we are like in the middle of launching is called Give Power. With Give Power, our mission is to make it so that you can actually support projects while earning. The way it works is basically by staking and locking Give tokens, you earn a yield, and then you use Give Power to signal support on projects. You can go to our Give farm and stake in this 100% Give staking pool. So the minimum APR you can gain is 27.43%, and that's just by staking your tokens. And if you wanted to earn more, you could lock your tokens for up to a year and earn up to 5.2 times the multiplier. So it's great. You can get more rewards from locking, but how does this affect projects and how does this come back to public goods? You get something called Give Power. It's a non-transferable ERC20 token, which is used to vote on projects that you believe in on the platform. So when you go to a project page, you have the option of either donating or you can boost the project with Give Power. You can use it to signal support for the projects you believe in. And then the top projects as voted by the community will get like #1 ranking or #2 ranking. All the projects will be ranked. The first benefit that projects get is increased givebacks for their donors. So if you remember, I mentioned before, when you donate to a project, you get up to 75% back of your value of your donation back streamed over time. With Give Power, the top projects that you donate to, you can actually get up to 80% of your value of donation back over time. So if you're signaling support on projects, and the new donors who give to those projects have a greater incentive to give to the projects voted by the community. Another benefit that projects will get is matching funds. So the top projects on the platform will actually get matching funds from Giveth. We have a matching pool where we're collecting funds to distribute to projects. So in this way, you can actually just stake your Give tokens, earn, and signal support for projects, and then those projects get additional benefit, and donors are incentivized to donate to those projects.
Yeah, talk about complicating something that doesn't need to be as complicated. This is like, yeah. Now it's just in just creating these tokens in order to vote or to stake or whatever. Yeah, I need to dig deeper into to Giveth. I mean, I've come across their stuff a few times.
Yeah, they've been around a long time, or in blockchain world, they've been around.
Yeah. But I think this idea, the story that they're telling people is like, hey, you that has the $5 and you could get that NFT geospatial satellite photo, or you could donate it to this other thing, like where you get stuff back. And like, I feel like they want this to seem like a bottom up grassroots effort. But in reality, like once you know, like people like Jack Dorsey or whatever, like the Silicon Valley crypto, like slush fund people, like they're just going to own all the tokens. Like regular people on the side who are trying to have their little pools or whatever, like it's not going to be a significant influence. And I feel like, but they want people to buy in, and they want people to reinforce the nonprofit model, because the nonprofit model is central to the impact finance space, which is in turn central to the AI impact token space. And it's gamified at all of these different levels. So I feel like, one of the things I was trying to talk about the other day about social prescribing and this tokenized commons, and this guy who wanted to set up a DAO for fiscal sponsorship, was that like you could pull in all these people who didn't have capacity to actually run ongoing organizations as sort of like pop-up ventures. And I feel like this is kind of the same thing. Like you have like pop-up ventures of like 3 friends who have an idea, and they pop up and they get a fiscal sponsorship, and then they kick back some tokens to their fiscal sponsor, and then they get up on the app with the give pool, and it's part of the game. But none of it is like is sustainable in any meaningful way. And none of it is actually going to solve the problem of like poverty or environmental devastation. It's all just playing around the edges while getting more data for modeling.
Yeah, her framing of nonprofits is just way off. I've spent a lot of time taking a critical look at nonprofits, and at least the larger nonprofits are not about making the world a better place at all. They're actually extensions of global enterprise and other activities that aren't about what they say that they're about. I'll just say that. Yeah, there are a lot of small grassroots nonprofits that are trying to do good, but when you put it into this economic model, it becomes something else that's actually above any other stated goals of the nonprofit. So yeah, that was one thing that caught my attention, was how she was framing. The nonprofits are there to solve the world problems, or the problems that are created by the system, and my understanding of it is that that's not the case. Anyway.
And even on this thing, they're setting nonprofits up against each other, right? Because everything's a leaderboard. It's leaderboards upon leaderboards upon leaderboards, right? And somebody's steering like the preferred project that the community voted on. Only like what is that community actually? So. Yeah,
I was even surprised that they would. It's like, you're really gonna rank charities with each other? Like,
well, that happens now, with funding. There's a lot of competition amongst different organizations, and that's one of the things that I was looking at was the funders basically direct the whole show, because an organization needs money, and they will look and see what there's money available for. So, and then they compete for that. So the model is just, they're just taking that and they're making it even more complicated here, but they're not dealing with the actual problem. They're adding to it.
Think, in the name of public good, there's the amount of need is growing exponentially, both like economic need and environmental need. The need is growing, and they're coming up with creative, like fancy Band-Aids, but none of it's actually, I don't know. The other thing that stood out to me was when she was saying that governments only manage the things in their boundaries. And I thought that was interesting because, like, essentially what you're saying is, like, you want a one world government.
Yeah.
Like, like you want a pervasive system that would, like, manage everything, because governments only manage what is where they are. And, they talk about the ocean as if the problem with the ocean is, isn't big oil and plastic, plastic packaging. But yeah, I thought that was another interesting takeaway, because they make it, you're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, look at all that trash. I hate that trash. And then you're like with her, like emotionally, like she cares about it. And then, but you're realizing, wait, what did we just ask for? Like a mechanical unit that runs the world.
Governments need more power, more capital, more resources to deal with this. It's like, okay.
And it's interesting because even in that particular picture, I can't remember if it was IXO. Like, one of them, there was a model where you paid, like, people in the South Pacific to pick up plastic garbage off the beach. Actually, it was the woman, I can't remember her name. She works with Sean Conaway, and she was talking about, like, early on the need for different impact verification models, and that you might need different levels. So some deals might require you to actually, like, just take a picture of how many trash bags you collected, and that would be sufficient. Right. But some might actually require you to have an Internet of Things enabled scale, so you would weigh it. And so they're already Anne something, I think was her name. So they're already figuring that out. So that plastic covered beach, well, and in my crazy way of thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, they're going to put all those people in, like, smart shoes and piezoelectric energy suits, and, like, harvest their body heat, while they pick up the trash on the beach or something crazy.
Well, also, I made a comment on that video where they were talking about that, about, if you create a financial incentive for something, you're going to get more of it. So I was like, I could see people at night, people need money, right? They're like, oh shoot, the beach is clean. Well,
oh, darn.
let's go out at night and give ourselves some work tomorrow so we can get paid. It's not that unrealistic to see that happening, but that's the whole thing about these incentives.
Yeah, it'll probably take about a week for that to happen.
So I will just say, like, again, I think what is being said here is really interesting. The delivery is just so oddball, and the fact that, like, we've arrived at this cultural moment that these are the people saying the things, like, I find really, and I don't know, Carl seems to have had way too much iced coffee, like, in terms of, like, the bouncing around, like, and maybe I'm just old and cranky, but, like, it's hard for me to take it seriously. And yet, having read all the papers and seen the structure behind it, I know it's important to pay attention to what is being said, although the delivery, again, it just reinforces how much of this world is like a performance to me. Like, yeah, these are people all performing roles in this unfolding drama.
Yeah.
So what is retroactive public goods funding? Now we know what public goods funding is.
Okay. So retroactive public goods funding is this idea that instead of having your public goods funding mechanism, DAO, whatever it is, funds public goods ahead of time. So where the DAO would say, hey, this project looks good and it looks promising, so I'm going to throw $100,000 at it and hope it's going to do something good. Instead, you fund public goods after those public goods have already been shown to have an impact, right? So, like right now, we already know that like Bankless has, for example, provided a lot of value to the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's been great. And so a retroactive DAO might just say, hey, I'm going to retroactively like plunk $250,000 over into the Bankless peeps. Or speaking of plunk, you might want to give $250,000 to some zero-knowledge cryptography peeps. So the core reasoning behind this is that like basically there's this large category of goods or public goods that I call entrepreneurial public goods. Like so like you've probably heard the slogan that like if like the way to be a successful entrepreneur is not to build a faster horse, right? Like the most successful. A lot of the most successful and important private goods in our society are things that were not even recognized as being important at the beginning until everyone was already using them and realized, like, kind of after the fact, how important they are. So with public goods, it's very similar, right? And so if you just like make a democratic decision of, hey guys, we're going to vote on what things we'll fund in the future, then you're going to get some very conformist and middle of the road opinions, and you're going to get a lot of projects that kind of roughly line up with people's existing social desirability biases, but you're not going to get your radical cool experiments that are like a bit out there, and 80% of them or even 90% turn out to be complete failures, and everyone's like, well, duh, that's a complete failure, but then the other 10% end up really succeeding in making enough of an impact to make the entire thing worth it. So retroactive public goods funding, the decentralized kind of voting based thing makes the decisions about what to fund after the fact, after the project has already shown value, based on the value that it has shown. And if you want to convert that into proactive funding, then that's something that can be done outside the mechanism, right? So for example, someone could even just invest into a team that's producing a public good, and the retroactive public goods funding gadget could just decide that the person who made that investment actually was a contributor to the public good, and they should get a really big reward as well.
Yeah, that kid's really excited. Guys bouncing off the walls. Adderall. Yeah, so Alison?
Well, I mean, essentially for me, this builds off of what I was trying to say, around how they're going to frame the emerging technologies as the public good. They need a new model. And so to me, and maybe you guys have more exposure to these spaces than I do, but what I'm hearing, initially in the retroactive funding, he's like, it's sort of like the Oprah thing, and I'll give you some tokens, and you that even though they want to run the world in these really regressive, controlling contracts, the people who are setting up the game at the end of the day can just make up whatever shit they want, that makes sense to them. To me, when he's saying, oh, why don't I throw some money to you and some money to you, I like that. That's not actually super accountable. I mean, it seems pretty fluid. And then later when they're saying within the hypercerts, what Dalrymple was saying, well, we want a platform that can have funding, on the front end, grants, funding on the back end. And what Budarin's saying, oh, well, if you're we can decide that if you gave money on the front end and it was a good project, then you get rewarded in addition to whatever benefit you get out of it. You get a whole extra layer of profit on it. So that it's these extra games that are being baked into the finance. And again, that this is the many flowers bloom, that we just want the most extreme ideas out there. We want to foster the most extreme, even if it doesn't align with traditional social values. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying. Oh, well, if you just do it the normal way, you might get things that are just conservatively in line with how you are today, where what we really want is some sort of extreme experiment. And we need a finance model that works for the extreme experiments. And then we can fudge around with it later. To me, it sort of feels like what he's saying is rules for everyone else. But those of us who are making the rules can just make whatever rules we want after the fact.
Right.
Yeah, they're pretty much just trying to come up with as many different financial mechanisms as possible and trying to sell them as much as possible. But they're also very much in alignment with these, the New America Foundation, all these other groups have been working on similar ideas for a really long time. So these people are the ones being propped up to just kind of throw all this stuff on the wall, and then Tamika will come in and institute something similar with Deloitte,
Yeah, exactly.
That's like some retroactive funding to like good, like FEMA contractors, which is something Deloitte's doing right now. Not the retroactive funding, but like a blockchain registry.
Yeah.
Impact sort of like verifiable that contractors verifiably did what they were contracted to do for FEMA and stuff. But
yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing, like for me, having spent some time backing up into some of the other contracting mechanisms and seeing like, these zero knowledge proofs, or like the smart contracts, like the legally binding smart contracts with Ian Grigg, like that these go back to the late 80s or early 90s. The structure, it's 30 years old before they roll out these new kinds of, the guy from Santa Fe was already talking essentially retroactive accounting for credit assignment in 94. Now it comes out into the public space. And again, for a certain category of people who uphold like these individuals like Buterin, like up front as like some sort of bleeding edge, theorists, they don't necessarily have the backstory. I mean, the academics do, but just the regular crypto investors don't. And then they create a whole culture. It's these separate cultures that are interlocked, but behind the scenes. Like the whole Tamika Tillerman, Anne-Marie Slaughter vibe versus these two people. Like, it's like you're telling stories to two different audiences.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting because I've been to some of these events, and it is a mixed bag in terms of where people are coming from. You have like your policymaker folks, you have your crypto investors, and then you have like young people who think they're gonna, in homelessness or whatever. It's an interesting mix for sure.
Cool. And you're kind of alluding to it, but you've talked about this concept of like, quote, project tokens. What is that?
Right. Okay. So project tokens are this idea that some team that's working on a public good and is eventually potentially getting retroactive public goods funding could create a token, and they could issue that token based on like who they think contributed to the public good, right? So they could pre-mine a large share of the token and distribute it out to different team members. They could put a large share of the token on Uniswap and then let people buy it on Uniswap. When they do that, then like they end up collecting ETH or whatever the asset is that the token is priced against, and then they can actually sell that ETH, and then they have, or just use that ETH, and they have something with which to pay like short-term expenses for people who are not willing to accept payments in project tokens themselves. The purpose of these project tokens is that later on, after the fact, when the project turns out to have actually provided value, the retroactive public goods funding oracle can just decide, I think this project has been useful, therefore I'm going to just buy up these project tokens. And when it buys up the project tokens, that rewards everyone who holds any quantity of these project tokens.
Nice.
That's interesting. And he mentions the oracle there too. That was.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all oracles. But I feel like to tie what we've been talking about, the like project tokens could very well be like the community inclusion currency type of thing, or reserves for community inclusion currency.
Definitely.
It's basically kind of the same idea, and I'm sure they would be merged together.
Well, and I thought it's interesting, like the teaming idea, because I've talked about that some, like within the refugee, which overlaps again with the Cello and community currencies, that like part of this eusociality too was like the integrity of the teams and the tightness of the teams and like defending the nest or different things. But now they're creating teams in the metaverse space. And so the idea of the AI, like picking and choosing virtual teaming, like across different time zones, or like you could get 24/7 like working, like if one team passes off from like as it goes around the globe, like you have a team that hits all, so the project is concurrent, like effort 24/7. Like they could construct certain teams, and using these project tokens, again, say we're going to give you something. You could either, like, if you need living expenses now, you could trade them out, or you could, if you have more liquidity, like you could hold on to them with the idea that future somebody else could be doing this. So like I sense that like most of these projects are going to be about either building out the metaverse infrastructure, like the public goods, smart contract layers and the e-government layers, and cleaning the data and getting everything ready, and then doing the cyber defense for it. So like there's going to be a whole new level of militarism that is happening in the metaverse, where like child soldiers, like this idea of like refugee child soldiers in Africa, like are going to be repurposed for like cybersecurity for the metaverse stuff. Like it's going to be a different kind of soldier warfare, but it's going to be like cyber warfare, and people are going to like be put together in sort of different teaming environments. They might not call it like military exactly, but ultimately it's going to be defending a terrain that is now digital in these spheres. So, anyway.
Yeah, and that's kind of already happening in sort of like a slightly different way than you're saying it, but with something like MakerDAO, they have, and they keep a lot of it like pretty dark, so I think it's unknown, but pretty much 24/7, like on-call teams or like subcontracted security firms and having processes for when there's like a smart contract issue or something, and when they would have to do like an emergency fix to the smart contract and put that through, and it's called like a dark fix, and it has this sort of like would be like there's like a trusted security team that's like hired on before, that's always ready to do this, and then they would publish a dark fix, which like the MKR Maker token holders can't actually see like what the fix to the smart contract is, because if you could see it, then like the hacker could just exploit the issue that was discovered, type of thing. So because it has like there's all these sort of game theoretical issues with trying to figure out how you've like fixed these things when emergencies happen and stuff like that. So it's pretty much exactly what you're saying, and that's like another place of where you realize that this is actually all kind of as anything like, you know, Maker, where it's, you know, tens of billions of dollars, that they're all controlled by pretty shadowy groups that you don't really know.
When they sell it as like, oh, it's going to be democratic or whatever, you know, you'll have your token, you'll have your vote or whatever, but you know, I question that. Just how democratic it'll actually be. I mean, there's like, well, anyways, that's a whole other conversation.
This is the last one.
Okay.
So cool. Okay, we got a good question from the audience. So do you necessarily mean public goods as in charity activities, or just mean broadly as a benefit to a large group of people?
So charity activities I would define as like creating benefits to other people for altruistic reasons. Like you're not being incentivized to do it. You're just like doing it out of the kindness of your heart, or just like, you know, you get some feeling of passion from like being able to do something meaningful in the world. And that is like, and actually, that doesn't even necessarily, like, that doesn't only motivate public goods, right? So, like, for example, holding the door for someone, like, that's a totally private good. Like, it's a service that benefits exactly one person. But at the same time, like, that's an act of kindness. Like, you could even say an act of charity that people do every day. But at the same time, there are also public goods that get produced incidentally. So, like, for example, you know, there's like Facebook, they do a whole bunch of centralized stuff, but sometimes they decide that like it's important enough to create tooling for centralized stuff that they create all their own tooling, and then they open source their tooling. And so, I think like React.js got created that way, right? So like basically like they do create public goods as a kind of byproduct of their like generally private good oriented activity. So that's something that happens too. And then another thing that happens too is people just create public goods because they're paid to do them, right? Like if you are like a worker working on building a road because the government pays you to do it, right? Like you're not necessarily being charitable, it's a job, you're being paid. You could be passionate about roads and have a kind of ethic of like the public service that you're doing, or you might not be, and you might be just like there to get the money, but you're also creating a public good. So I guess you do need to make the distinction between like what the motivations are of the people that are doing the thing versus kind of the privateness versus publicness of the thing that is being created.
Yeah, and by the way, one thing that Vitalik talked about a little bit earlier was that we are trying to like kind of give a business model to the public good. So what that is actually doing is it is reducing the amount of charity-driven public goods and increasing, well, maybe not reducing it, but at least it's increasing the amount of non-charity driven public goods. And so this is clearly benefiting all of us, but it is, it's not about charity. It's really, it's really about paying people for the value that they're creating and creating that really virtuous cycle.
I think sometimes it's a mix, right? So like, for example, there's a lot of people who are perfectly happy to take extreme pay cuts to work on things that are in the public interest, but they're not quite willing to take 100% pay cuts, right? Like they need just enough funding that they can feel like it's a comfortable job, right? And so like there are totally people who like, if there is no public goods funding at all, they'll just say, well, they might work on an open source thing for a couple of months and they'll say, well, screw this. The guys that are shilling scam coins are earning $25 million off an ICO, so I'm going to go shill a scam coin. But if you just crank up the public goods funding a little bit, then you can crank it up to the level where like these kind of not infinitely altruistic but still altruistic people actually end up being empowered to and have the opportunity to work on the public goods that they've always been more passionate about doing.
All right.
So for me, this goes back to Micah Tillman saying that like when they did their survey, only half of the electronic government stuff was open source, right? And so they're like, it all has to be open source. We need it all open source. So how is that all going to happen, right? Like they need a funding stream. They need a viable structure to get that in place, to get the smart contract layer in place as an open source standardized system. So, and again, they don't want it to be charity. And I think that's what's really sinking in is this idea that once you start to make everything that might have been considered a charitable gift into an investment that's tied to impact, and the impact is tied to data collection that is tied to developing generalized artificial intelligence, like the ball starts rolling really fast. And so like once all of the humanitarian aid space is no longer just aid that we're giving you, is an investment into some other outcome that we're anticipating that's linked to data, or the churches are saying we're no longer giving charity, now there's an expectation of a return on that investment. Like that's a whole new paradigm. That's trillions upon trillions of dollars that's being plowed into various kinds of projects. And the more projects they can frame as these open source, they're essentially saying like, we want to get rid of charity as we understand it and create a business model. And the business model is impact. And so like when I wandered into the standardized testing stuff and found what I found, like I never understood how big it was going to get. Like that foundationally, we're going to have to live in the simulation so that they can get enough data to run this new business model. And yet there's the treachery that it's all cloaked in this benevolence, right? And then how do you have the conversation with people who see the issues in the world and say, yes, but not this solution. This isn't the solution. This is a counter solution. This is a fraud. when it's so pervasive that almost everybody knows somebody who's involved in it. And they're like, well, they can't all be involved in it, Jason, right? They can't all be bad people. And we're like, we're not saying everyone's bad. We're just saying that this paradigm is going to take us into a metamorphic place that we're not, I don't think most of us are emotionally prepared to go.
Yeah.
Or we should be prepared to go. So anyway, that's my.
Yeah. And I've just always been interested at how like money or now tokens or whatever do drive behavior. And it's not something that's coming from you. And what are the implications of that, of having, moving more and more toward a society where people their activities are just literally being driven. They are being driven by the need or desire for tokens or money or whatever. And again, there's this assumption that that's the natural order. I
think the only one thing I want to add, I don't think they're going to get rid of charities too, but even organizations that are doing charity where people that donate are expecting a return on that money, they still have to be folded into the impact investment framework, where they have to show that what they did, they have to show the data of what they did made a specific quantifiable impact to the people. And even if they're not necessarily rolled into the
blockchain,
the structures where people are actually trying to get return on their investment, it's still a part of the same sort of structure. But.
Yeah.
And what, the thing in doing my research, what I realized is that Hewlett Packard was really central in remaking the third sector for data collection. I mean, and they had sort of 3 or 4 major giving categories, one of which was, one was open education resources. So there's your programming, but one of them was philanthropy. And you could see how they bought out all of the sectors, all the platforms, all the publications, all the academics, all the identity politics. They just bought them one after the other. And these are people who are, managing biometric border control in Gaza. This is not a neutral system. And the same, with third sector capital partners, George Overholzer, leading Pay for Success, he came out of Capital One credit cards, which was maximizing debt based on complex analysis, algorithmic analysis of people's capacity to carry debt and be happy about it. And then he went on to create the nonprofit finance fund. So yeah, this is 30, it's more than 30 years in the making, but hardcore, there are people who've spent their entire careers building it to this point, building it to Web3. And then the question is, will they be able to scale it, and in scaling it, will it still remain functional? Will this ideal of some sort of real-time cyber-physical feedback loop happen? And I'm still hoping, it feels like a lot of moving parts. And even in the new America, you've seen this, there's some random person's name pops up in the middle of Tamika Tillman. It's still not beautiful. It's still not seamless. There's all sorts of technical errors in these systems that it feels like the deck is kind of stacked against it actually fully executing the way they imagine they're talking about it. But I still feel it's important that we talk about it, because the stakes are just too high to blithely go along and presume none of it's going to happen.
Yeah, it'll be messy and clunky. But it's clear, the amount of money that's being poured into this is astronomical. So yeah, people should pay attention. Well, I think we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, and I kind of have to go soon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Leo. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.